Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to pack a kiln. So this might seem like it's, like a really technical thing to do, and you're like, you might think, I can't do this. You 1,000,000% can pack a kiln if that's something you wanted to do, and I'm here to tell you how, and it's very easy, and you can do it. So. The first thing to say is I'm going to be talking specifically about how to pack an electric kiln. So this is an electric pottery kiln. My electric pottery kiln is it goes up to stoneware temperatures, but this would be very similar principles. That well, exactly the same basically. If you're packing a kiln for an earthenware glaze firing, or an earthenware or a bisque firing, or or a stoneware glaze firing, both the glaze firings, earthenware and stoneware, they would be exactly the same like principles. The only difference is like the temperature. And yeah, then a bisque firing is slightly different. And yeah, we're just going to talk about it in this episode, like how you actually do it. And just to say, if you wanted we're not going to be talking about like the temperatures in this episode, but if you wanted like the temperatures for a stoneware glaze firing and a bisque firing, I don't cover earthenware in this particular guide. There is a guide for you. It's a totally free guide called Electric Kiln Firing Schedule, which you can get in the show notes. There'll be a link. It's totally free, and yeah, you can just download it, and it's got kind of like all the temperatures, and like there's all the technical terms that are used in kiln firing, like soaking. And so yeah, if you had your own kiln, you wanted to know like how to program it to do a stoneware glaze firing or a bisque firing, you can use that guide. It's for you. It's free. So where do you start? Okay, so you start with kiln. It's called kiln furniture. So kiln furniture refers to kiln shelves and these things called props. So props and kiln shelves are made out of like really durable clay material. I think it's fire clay, but it can be fired up to really high temperatures, so it's not going to melt in a stoneware firing, which gets up to 1,260 degrees Celsius. So they're made from like, yeah, incredibly strong ceramic. And what you're doing essentially in a kiln firing is you're arranging the pottery in such a way as to maximize the use of space using the kiln furniture. So basically, what you're doing is you're adding shelves, you're adding props, you're adding props all the same height on each kind of layer, and you're adding layers and layers of pottery to each kiln shelf, with a little bit of space at the top. It's probably good to leave about an inch of space between each shelf. And that's what you're doing. That's how you're packing it. So kiln props come in loads of different sizes, which is so good, because you might have like really different shaped, sized pottery, and you need to kind of like accommodate it, like all the different kind of, might have like tall vases or something, and you might have like very small dishes which you want to have like a small kiln prop for between each kiln shelf. So some of the kiln props have little like kind of nodules on, which kind of help to stabilize them as you're stacking them up. And then some of them have really big bases, and that really helps just to kind of like, again, like stabilize it as you're kind of stacking them up. So yeah, these are just available from like pottery suppliers in loads of different sizes. You just get the appropriate sizes for like the kind of the pottery you're making. So for example, if you're making loads of really kind of shallow dishes, you might want, a whole load of quite small kiln props, because then, between each shelf, if you're making kind of different sizes of pottery, say for example, like I make kind of bugs, and then I make like also small dishes, then it's good to have like a range of different sizes. Then you can kind of like, have each shelf like a different kind of thing. You can kind of yeah, make kind of the shelf for the mugs, and then the shelf for the dishes, so yeah, so it's a good to have a kind of different assortment of like different sizes of kiln prop. Another thing to say is it's a really good idea to have like if if you've got like a I basically have a kiln which has got like a round kiln shelves. It's a round kiln, it's got round kiln shelves. I can actually buy half half shelf kiln shelf, so they're like a semicircle basically. So that also really helps me to kind of like stack the pottery in such a way that like it's maximizing the use of the space. So say for example I've got like, 3 items or something of like really tall things, I can kind of put them separately and then have a half shelf and then stack some things which are like kind of half the size of the really tall items and stuff. So it really just helps you kind of like fit it all in there. Okay, so the basic principle of a bisque firing, let's do a bisque firing first, is that what you're doing is you're just firing it up to the point where the clay's molecular structure has changed. So it's not going, it's not going too high a temperature, and you're not having any glaze in there. So things can touch each other. So that's the basic principle: is that it's okay to have bisqueware, like different pottery, to have the greenware before it gets fired touching each other in that bisque firing kiln. So yeah, you can put things inside each other, you can put small things inside big things, you can stack things up to a certain extent on each other. The only thing to say is that like you don't want things to be under like too much pressure in the bisque firing. So like you don't want to have like a huge stack of something or other because it can like put pressure. Like pottery is still quite delicate, especially at the greenware stage, before you switch the kiln on. So you don't want to like squash the pottery and crack it, especially because it's getting up to really high temperatures and stuff. So yeah, you can stack things up together. I sort of usually stack about four things, like four-ish small dishes, which are about an inch high, a couple of centimeters high. Um, yeah, it's about, I don't know, yeah, 2.5 centimeters high or something. I can stack maybe four of those inside each other before I'm kind of slightly worrying about like, the pressure that it's under sort of thing. So things can touch, loads of things, can just bung as much stuff as you can possibly in there. Things can just be, in between each other, on each other, around each other, but you don't want anything touching any of the kind of electronic elements around the side. So keep everything to the actual shelf area. You don't want anything touching the sides of the kiln. So I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on electric kiln firing. So if you're not sure what temperatures you should use, what kiln schedule you should use for a bisque firing and also a stoneware glaze firing, this guide is for you and it will tell you everything you need to know. And it's available in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. Okay, so that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that what you need to do. So what you're basically doing is you're starting with an empty kiln, and then you're seeing what stacks in there. Okay, so the first shelf needs to be on very very tiny props at the base of the kiln. So you need to raise the first shelf off the base of the kiln, and then you can start putting things on. So what I do is I put the props on first, and I use 3 props per shelf. And when I was like reading books about this, it was basically saying that you need to have the props in the same place every time for each shelf. Okay, so say for example, you put like what I would do is I would put my first shelf in, that just stays in there the whole time. It's just on little props. So that goes in, it's about like maybe 2 inches off the ground, maybe like 5 centimeters off the ground, off the kiln, the base of the kiln. So you like, that's the first shelf. I put my props in of like the kind of the height I want to kind of do for the first level. I put everything in, stack everything in. So there's 3 props. Then I put the next kiln shelf on. Then I would put the props in again. Then I would stack everything else up for the next kind of height of the shelf, and then I put the next shelf on, and then just keep going until I basically reach the top of the kiln. And then again, you want to leave a little bit of space at the top of the kiln. I would say about 2 inches, about 5 centimeters is probably the best thing to do at the top of the kiln. So you don't want it to be like totally touching, the lid of the kiln or anything. And that kiln lids are quite heavy as well. You don't want to be like squashing the pottery. So yeah, so okay, that's how to kind of stack a bisque kiln. And One thing to say actually is like not to like overpack the kiln. Like obviously it's great to like make economical use of that space and stuff. What I found is that sometimes the kiln can find it quite difficult to like get up to the right temperature if like the base of it is very, very stacked with things. So what I would normally do is I wouldn't put loads and loads of shelves on at the very base of it. I would kind of put maybe a shelf which is maybe 15 centimeters or something high. So I put maybe some mugs in there, at the base shelf, um, and then like maybe I'd have, a middle shelf where it's a little bit narrower. And then I would have maybe, another shelf which was like maybe a 15 centimeter one of like loads of mugs again or something. And then I would leave the top shelf. You don't need any props on there at all because obviously there's nothing waiting on it, nothing, you've got no shelf on the top. Then you can just like put whatever you want on the top. So I usually save the top of the kiln, the very top shelf, for quite large objects, like as say like the tallest thing I make is probably, I don't know, maybe 20 centimeters high or something. So that's what I put on the very top of the kiln. And again, because it's got no props, it's a really good space to be, firing more awkwardly shaped things or like bigger things or like taller things. And the really good thing is you don't have to then use a really long kind of stack of props to get that space for firing that thing. You kind of want the tallest things at the top of the kiln. That's what I've generally found is like the best thing. So, okay, so let's move on to the glaze firing. So, the only difference with a glaze firing is that pots cannot be touching each other. And also, you want to double check that the base of the pot is clean. So, what I do is basically I obviously wipe each piece of pottery before as I'm making it, but then I'll do another check before I put it in the glaze firing uh, before I actually stack the kiln, that the base is completely free of glaze. Another thing I do is I just make sure that there's no glaze, maybe, a few millimeters up the side of the pot. And that just really helps to avoid when the glaze might drip a tiny bit, like going on the kiln shelf, because it will basically just stick to the kiln shelf. Any glaze will stick to the kiln shelf because it just becomes, if you think about it, it's like but going to become molten in the kiln. And so you have to think to yourself, like, oh, if this touches anything, it's going to stick to it. When it dries, it's going to stick like glass. There's like basically like melted glass in there, so it's going to then stick to each other. So so check the bases. Put things quite close together. I normally leave about maybe a centimetre and a half between each thing. You don't want it necessarily like too close. I mean, you can pack it really, really, really close, but like I try and maybe yeah, centimetre and a half. Yeah, I don't want it closer than that. Like another thing that can happen in a glaze firing actually is that color can like transfer if things are like really, really, really close. Like say like for example, sometimes when I fire things like with verdigris in the kiln, sometimes the verdigris will sort of transfer to like other parts of the pot and stuff kind of in the kiln atmosphere. So that's another thing to be like kind of mindful of if you've got like say like for example, if you've got a whole kiln where you want things to be like perfectly kind of transparent or like perfectly white or something, it's probably a good idea to fire that all in one go rather than like putting like a whole load of stuff which is like verdigris in there at the base or something, and then like having your white pots at the top, and then sometimes color transfer can happen. So yeah, so we're like not letting things touch. We're not letting obviously things touch like the sides of the kiln. Again, you just keeping it all on the shelf. You don't really want things overhanging the shelf. Things not allowed to touch. Yeah, and then also make sure the base is free of glaze. And yeah, another thing to say actually is that it's a really good idea to put bat wash, this thing called bat wash, on your kiln shelves. Um, before you actually fire them. So you can just, when you buy a new kiln and you buy like new kiln shelves or something, you can use this thing called bat wash and paint it on just with a normal brush, just with like I say like a decorator's brush or something. You mix that with a bit of water, and that just really helps things like not to stick to your kiln, so to stick to your kiln shelf. So it means that if for example you did get a bit of glaze on the kiln shelf, the bat wash just helps that to like kind of come off and not to kind of stick to your kiln shelf and like ruin your kiln shelf. So bat wash is a really, really good idea. Yeah, to use in the pottery kiln. So yeah. I think that's kind of everything to say, apart from try and resist the urge to like open your kiln before it's ready. So ideally you want your kiln to be down to like room temperature. I mean, for my one, it's because it's a very well insulated kiln. It takes absolutely ages to cool down. It takes about a day to heat up to stoneware temperatures, and then about 24 hours at least to cool down to like probably even about 70 degrees in there. So I should probably leave it even longer. But yeah, ideally you want it to cool down to like room temperature before you open the kiln, because you really don't want to put any kind of like thermal stress on any of the pottery by opening it too soon, and kind of making it colder than it needs to be, and that cracking can occur. And it's also things really hot in there, so it's really, really, super important just to kind of like leave the kiln to cool down to like room temperature. So yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I think it's been helpful. Like, you can definitely pack a kiln. It's very easy to do. You just need some props, kiln shelves. Just stack the pottery up. Don't let it touch each other. It's going to be in a glaze firing. It could touch each other in a bisque firing. That's fine. And yeah, you definitely can. It's just a matter of, it's almost like a puzzle, kind of just fitting everything together, and then the best kind of possible shapes fitting with the best possible shapes fitting with the appropriate kiln props and kiln shelves. And like, yeah, like I said, save the tallest things for the top. That's what I found is like the most helpful thing. So thank you so much for joining me. This episode has been so nice to talk to you about how to pack a kiln. You absolutely can. If that's something you want to do, you 100% can do it. And wishing you very, very happy potting until the next episode. And really looking forward to seeing you then. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.